They say wind power is clean, renewable, and quiet, but no one warned me it would unleash the wrath of the HOA. The moment I flipped the switch on my small, homemade windmill, the sky was calm, the blades turned gently, and my workshop lit up with pure energy. I was celebrating with a fresh mug of coffee when she appeared, Karen Melthorpe, the HOA president, marching across my lawn like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. She didn't knock. She didn't even pause. She just shouted, "That spinning monstrosity is ruining the aesthetic harmony of our community." I thought she was joking. I laughed. Big mistake. That laugh? It started a war. By the end of that week, my trash service was mysteriously cancelled, my mailbox was lying in pieces at the curb, and someone had dumped a dozen HOA violation notices on my porch, each signed with Karen's signature flourished. And all because I dared to spin a little wind. When I moved into the Silver Pines neighborhood, I didn't expect paradise, but I did expect peace. A modest cul-de-sac lined with manicured lawns, tall pine trees, and houses that all looked a little too similar. I bought my house at the edge of the neighborhood, where the land sloped slightly downward into open grassland, perfect for the breeze to roll in off the hills. As a retired aerospace engineer with too much time on my hands and an itch to build, I constructed a small windmill in my backyard. Not one of those towering eyesores from the desert, just a modest 15-foot design, sleek, whisper-quiet, and entirely within county regulations. It powered my workshop, where I tinkered with solar batteries and old drones. I'd even made it sleek and modern to blend in with the fence. It was efficient, elegant, and beautiful. And for a few days everything was perfect. But perfection never lasts when there's a Karen lurking around. I first noticed her during a neighborhood barbecue. She stood rigid by the potato salad, wearing sunglasses at dusk and whispering to another board member while pointing at my backyard. I dismissed it. I thought maybe she was just nosy. Turns out she wasn't nosy. She was obsessed. The next morning, I found a letter folded and stuffed awkwardly into my doorframe. It was an HOA violation notice accusing me of constructing an unauthorized aerial structure capable of disrupting the visual tranquility of surrounding homes. The language was ridiculous, like she had swallowed a law book and vomited up paranoia. I called the HOA number listed on the letter. Karen herself answered. She didn't even say hello. Just barked, "Have you removed the turbine yet?" I calmly explained that I had a legal permit, the windmill met every county code, and it wasn't even visible from the street. She scoffed and told me permits were irrelevant in planned neighborhoods, and that the HOA supersedes petty municipal nonsense. I wanted to hang up right there, but I couldn't resist asking, "Karen, do you even know how electricity works?" That got me a dial tone. And, as I would soon find out, a target on my back. 2 days later, my trash wasn't picked up. I called the sanitation company. They said my pickup had been canceled by someone claiming to be me. Then, my mailbox was knocked over. Coincidence? Maybe. But when I found a printed flyer taped to my front door with the words, "Energy bullies not welcome in Silver Pines," I knew this was personal. It was signed by the Preservation Committee, which, upon investigation, turned out to be a made-up subcommittee of exactly one person, Karen Melthorpe. Still, I didn't retaliate. Not yet. I fixed the mailbox, arranged new trash service, and upgraded my security cameras. I figured she'd get bored. But she didn't get bored. She got louder. One morning, I caught her on my property with a tape measure, taking photos of the windmill. When I asked what she was doing, she said, "Gathering evidence." I said, "For what?" "Wind crimes." She didn't laugh. She told me I had 24 hours to remove the visual obstruction or face daily fines. I reminded her again that I had permit. Her response? "This is a community, not a science fair." I decided it was time to hit back, not with anger but with strategy. I called my old buddy Malcolm, a zoning lawyer who owed me more than a few favors. Malcolm did a little digging and confirmed what I'd hoped. Not only was my windmill legal, but HOA regulations couldn't override state-approved green energy initiatives. In fact, Karen's actions might have violated a specific clean energy protection clause that could expose the HOA to fines. The best part? The county had just launched a rebate program for residential renewable energy structures. If Karen pushed me into court, I'd walk away with cash in hand and a televised apology. But I didn't want just to win. I wanted her to feel it. So, while Malcolm prepared the legal response, I started drawing plans for something bigger. A project I'd been toying with for years but had never dared attempt. If she hated a 15-foot windmill, what would she do when a 38-foot solar tower rose from the earth behind my house, legal, gleaming, and casting the longest shadow in Silver Pines? As I began laying the groundwork, literally and figuratively, more neighbors started to notice the feud. Some knocked on my door with support, others left anonymous letters calling me the Sun Devil or Turbine Tyrant. But a surprising number of people cheered me on. The teenage twins next door offered to help me dig. One guy even brought over fresh lemonade while we were pouring the concrete base. Karen, meanwhile, patrolled the cul-de-sac like a hawk in pearls, snapping photos, pointing at my property from her porch, and giving daily updates on the emergency HOA board meetings she was hosting in her living room. One evening, as I tightened the final bolts on the windmill for a maintenance check, Karen marched over yet again. She held up a laminated HOA rulebook and shouted, "I will not let you turn our neighborhood into an industrial zone." I calmly pointed at my American flag, fluttering in the wind next to the turbine, and said, "Karen, this is America. We innovate here." Her face turned the color of a burnt tomato. She stomped off without another word. But the battle was only beginning. Because that very night, I noticed something strange on my security feed: Karen and two other HOA board members sneaking around the side of my fence with measuring tape, clipboards, and flashlights. They weren't just watching. They were planning something. That's when I knew. It wasn't about a windmill. It wasn't about the view. It was about control. And if there was one thing I'd learned as an engineer, it's that systems that try to suppress innovation eventually break under their own pressure. My windmill wasn't the end. It was the opening act. So I got to work. And as Karen plotted in secret, I was quietly building the solar-powered revolution she would never see coming, until her entire lawn was cast in its shimmering shadow. Let the games begin. By sunrise the next morning, the battle lines had been drawn, and Silver Pines was no longer just a quiet, pine-scented suburban dream. It was a powder keg of pettiness, power trips, and solar ambitions. Karen had kicked off her latest crusade by holding an impromptu emergency HOA meeting on her front porch. She stood on a folding chair like some kind of cult leader, waving an oversized copy of the HOA bylaws and declaring my windmill a precursor to environmental chaos. A few of her loyalists, retirees with matching lawn ornaments and binoculars permanently strapped to their necks, nodded solemnly while others looked more confused than convinced. Meanwhile, I was in my backyard sketching the frame design for the solar tower, measuring shadows with a drone, and casually sipping lemonade just within her line of sight. The fines started piling up immediately. Every morning, a new violation notice was taped to my mailbox, my garage, and even once to my dog's collar. Alleged infractions ranged from improper energy apparatus orientation to causing excessive solar glare on adjacent properties. I knew none of them were enforceable. My friend Malcolm, the zoning lawyer, was on speed dial and just as amused as I was. According to state law, not only were small windmills and solar installations permitted, but any HOA trying to ban them could be slapped with steep penalties. Still, the harassment continued like clockwork. Karen wasn't trying to win legally, she was trying to make me so miserable I'd give up out of exhaustion. But I wasn't the surrendering type. One afternoon, as I worked on the tower foundation with a rented cement mixer and two enthusiastic teenage volunteers from next door, a shiny black SUV screeched to a halt in front of my driveway. Karen stepped out in a crisp white pantsuit, holding a rolled-up set of blueprints like it was a baton of justice. She marched up without a word, shoved the rolled plans into my chest, and said, "Cease and desist. This is your final warning." I calmly handed her a copy of the county's Green Energy Ordinance, laminated for effect. Her eyes narrowed. She turned to the teens and barked, "Do your parents know you're participating in illegal construction?" They nodded enthusiastically and told her their mom had made them snacks for the job. She left sputtering. Later that week, Karen sent out a neighborhood-wide email blast with the subject line, "Urgent Community Threat." It described me as a rogue energy renegade, warned of electrical explosions, and included a crudely photoshopped image of my windmill engulfed in lightning bolt. She urged residents to sign a petition for immediate dismantling of non-compliant energy structures. To her surprise, the petition gained only 11 signatures, and 3 of them were the same person using fake names. What Karen didn't anticipate was that more people in Silver Pines were tired of the HOA's nonsense than she realized. Some of them just needed a spark, or in this case, a solar-powered spotlight, to rally behind. Support started pouring in from unexpected places. A neighbor 2 streets over dropped off a note that read, "Build that tower. I'm sick of Karen complaining about my mailbox color." Another offered me leftover solar panel mounts from his old shed. A retired electrician even volunteered to help wire the backup system. What had begun as a personal project was becoming a neighborhood movement. Karen, sensing the shift, upped her game. The next morning, I found 2 county inspectors at my door, sheepish and apologetic. They said someone had reported a suspicious energy operation involving possible radioactive component. I showed them the plans, gave them iced tea, and by the end of the visit, one of them asked if I'd consider building a smaller version for his cabin. Despite her efforts, the foundation for the solar tower was now complete. I had poured reinforced concrete, installed the central column anchors, and even had the reflective mirror panels delivered. Karen tried once more to halt progress with a community safety protest, during which she blocked my driveway with folding chairs, chanting "Save our skies" into a megaphone she barely knew how to use. Her grand protest drew a crowd of 5, including a confused pizza delivery guy and a bored golden retriever. When I turned on the sprinklers, purely on schedule, they scattered like pigeons in a park. Around this time, I got a message from a local college professor who had seen the drama unfolding online. A neighbor had posted about the HOA versus solar tower showdown, and it went semi-viral. The professor offered me access to some prototype solar tracking panels he'd been developing for a research project. They adjusted automatically with the sun's movement and optimized energy absorption by nearly 25%. It was a dream upgrade. I accepted immediately and invited him over for a tour. As he admired the setup, Karen lurked behind her hedges, trying to photograph him with a camera from 2006 that still used AA batteries. The day the tower structure began rising was the day Silver Pines officially lost its collective mind. As steel beams started climbing skyward, Karen went door to door warning of sun deflection beams and photosynthesis theft. She accused me of trying to turn the neighborhood into a heliostat testing field and even contacted a local gardening club to rally against me on behalf of oppressed rose bushes. No one took her seriously, but she continued anyway, doubling down with new flyers, social media rants, and one particularly bizarre video where she claimed my tower was part of a government surveillance network. In the meantime, I installed energy storage batteries, an inverter, and a small display panel that showed how much energy was being generated in real time. Kids started stopping by after school just to look at the numbers climb. One mother told me her son had chosen solar engineer for his future job thanks to the tower. That small comment stuck with me more than any insult Karen hurled. Because even amid the drama, something good was taking root. It wasn't just about power. It was about possibility. That night, as I stood on the newly poured observation deck halfway up the tower, I looked out across the neighborhood. Lights twinkled below, some from houses powered by old grid lines, others now partially illuminated by my own energy overflow thanks to a net metering system I'd installed. I smiled. From my vantage point, Karen's house looked smaller. She could throw fines, shout into megaphones, and paste my name on angry newsletters, but she couldn't change one undeniable fact. The future had already arrived, and it was rising above her roofline inch by inch. By the time the steel spine of the tower reached its full height, a strange silence had settled over Silver Pines. Not peaceful silence, but that eerie hush before a storm. The solar panels were being installed in carefully aligned rows, glinting like armor in the sun. I had designed the structure not just for maximum efficiency, but also for aesthetic intimidation. Karen's words, not mine. The tower stood at 38 feet, just under the maximum allowed for non-commercial energy structures, with sleek black solar trackers that adjusted slowly throughout the day, following the sun like a sunflower on a mission. It was a thing of beauty to most. But to Karen, it was a glowing, humming monument to her failure. The very next morning, she struck again. This time it wasn't flyers or megaphones. It was a cease and desist letter delivered by a private courier, stamped with legal jargon that she clearly had no authority to enforce. It claimed my tower violated community lighting codes, caused environmental imbalance, and reflected aggressive sunlight into her meditation room. I chuckled at the absurdity of it. She accused a solar panel of being aggressive, as if photons were now belligerent. My lawyer friend Malcolm took one look at the letter and said, "This isn't even good fiction." But the real storm hit just a few days later. The tower's shadow, perfectly timed and calculated, began falling across Karen's prized hydrangea garden every afternoon. For the past 3 years, those flowers had won the neighborhood garden contest. A contest, mind you, judged by a panel she chaired. The moment her plants started showing signs of stress, she lost whatever composure she had left. She showed up at my front gate red-faced, breathing heavily, clutching a trowel like a weapon. She accused me of sabotage, of orchestrating solar shade warfare. I asked her calmly if she would like some shade-friendly plant suggestions. She hurled the trowel into my lawn and stormed off, her voice cracking as she shouted something about a class-action lawsuit involving bees and biointerference. More neighbors began noticing the changes. Some loved the shade. A couple of elderly residents even thanked me for cooling their living rooms in the late afternoons. But others, especially those close to Karen, followed her lead like a choir of suburban outrage. I caught whispers at the community park. One woman claimed my solar tower was emitting low-frequency waves that made her cat anxious. Another said her Wi-Fi was slower because of it. One man, who had never spoken to me before, yelled from across the street, "You're blocking our sunsets, Langston." I didn't respond. I just waved. Despite the noise, I kept building. The panels were fully wired now. The tower was functional. My home and workshop ran entirely on its power, and the overflow went back into the local grid through a legal net metering system. This, of course, only enraged Karen further. She didn't just hate the tower. She hated that it worked, that it had become a beacon of something she couldn't control. And when she couldn't fight it legally, she turned to slander. She posted daily on the neighborhood message board, claiming my tower was blinding pilots, that birds were falling from the sky in droves, and that the tower's humming was disrupting sleep cycles. She went on a local community podcast and ranted about how renewable energy was a tool of tyranny. It backfired spectacularly. Her interview went viral not because people agreed with her, but because she accidentally referred to the sun as a government conspiracy and called solar panels sky leeches. The comments section lit up with memes, and someone even remixed her rant into a techno song that my neighbor's teenager played on loop from his porch. I thought maybe embarrassment would finally slow her down, but I underestimated Karen's stamina for nonsense. The next blow came quietly. A building inspector showed up one morning with a clipboard, polite but direct. He said there had been a complaint about structural concerns with the tower and that they had to do a surprise inspection. I let him in, walked him through the blueprints, the foundation, the materials, the anchors. He was impressed, even a little enthusiastic. He confirmed everything was up to code and left with a smile. But the fact that he showed up unannounced meant only one thing: Karen was playing dirty. So I fought back in my own way. I filed a complaint with the county's Renewable Energy Department. Not only was she harassing me, but she was also actively obstructing a legal clean energy project. Malcolm helped me craft the documentation, and we submitted evidence of her trespassing, the false complaints, and the letters she had issued without authority. It didn't take long for the county to respond. Within a week, Karen received a warning letter stating that further interference would result in legal action and potential fines for violating state energy protection laws. She didn't take it well. That evening, she stood at the end of my driveway with a sign that read "Solar Tyranny Ends Now." She held it up alone, glaring at every passing car. It might have been sad if it weren't so ridiculous. The next day she doubled down, organizing a neighborhood protest. Only 4 people showed up, 2 of whom left halfway through because of the heat. Ironically, they took shelter under the tower's shade while complaining about it. What Karen didn't realize was that her obsession had made her the story, not the tower. Reporters started showing up. One local news crew came to film a segment titled "Neighborhood Divided Over Solar Feud." Karen gave them a dramatic interview where she compared my tower to a billboard in Times Square. When they interviewed me, I simply explained the benefits, the legality, and the energy output. The story aired that night, and public opinion swung hard in my favor. The next morning, my mailbox overflowed with letters of support from across the state. One man sent me a hand-drawn blueprint of his own backyard solar tower, inspired by mine. Another offered to donate panels for expansion. Meanwhile, Karen had reached desperation. She began floating conspiracy theories about my tower being part of a secret tech company experiment. She accused me of installing facial recognition cameras on the panels, of spying on the neighborhood, of having ties to international solar cartels. No one took her seriously anymore. Even her closest allies started distancing themselves. Her newsletter subscribers dropped. Her weekly meetings dwindled. Her reign was collapsing, and she could feel it. Despite her flailing, I knew this wasn't over yet. People like Karen don't go down quietly. They double down, regroup, and try again. But what she didn't understand was that I was no longer just defending my right to clean energy. I was standing for everyone who had ever been harassed by petty power plays and weaponized rules. The solar tower wasn't just generating electricity, it was generating defiance. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The calm before the explosion came in the form of a neighborhood email titled "Final Notice: Safety Violation of Tower." Sent from Karen's personal HOA account, it was drenched in faux professionalism and fearmongering. She claimed the solar tower's structure had begun to shift and that falling debris posed a risk to children, pets, and the sacred architectural order of Silver Pines. She even attached a poorly angled photo of a single leaf resting on my driveway as supposed proof of high wind fallout. It would have been laughable if it weren't so blatantly malicious. I could sense something brewing beyond her usual antics. Karen wasn't trying to win hearts anymore. She was out for blood, and this time she had something up her sleeve. That something revealed itself just 3 days later when I returned home from running errands to find 2 unfamiliar men with hard hats and clipboards standing in my driveway. Their van, which bore the name of a structural engineering firm I didn't recognize, was parked half on my grass. They claimed to be conducting an HOA-requested audit on the tower's safety compliance. When I asked for credentials, they became vague. One muttered something about foundation displacement, and the other started taking photos of my license plate. That was all I needed to see. I walked back inside, pulled up my security camera feeds, and immediately forwarded the footage to Malcolm. Within the hour, we had confirmation. The firm wasn't city-sanctioned. It had been privately hired by Karen under a false pretense. I could feel the shift. Karen was no longer just a bored HOA president with too much free time. She had crossed the line into reckless sabotage, and that meant it was time for a different kind of response. Malcolm filed a formal complaint with the county zoning department and attached the video evidence of unauthorized inspection. But we didn't stop there. I also contacted the local press, this time not for laughs but for defense. A neighborhood dispute might make for mild entertainment, but tampering with private property using fake inspectors? That was newsworthy. Karen, of course, doubled down as only she could. She hosted what she called an urgent town gathering in her backyard, complete with folding chairs, a rented speaker, and a homemade presentation titled, "The Solar Menace, When Towers Attack." She presented her evidence. Edited photos, a doctored chart, and a speech that would have been more at home in a tinfoil hat conference. Her biggest claim? That my solar tower was interfering with local wildlife patterns and causing birds to fly into windows. Ironically, a bird flew over mid-speech and dropped a gift directly onto her chartboard. It was the first time I'd ever heard an entire crowd suppress a laugh while she kept rambling as if nothing had happened. But she wasn't finished. 2 nights later, just after midnight, my motion sensors triggered. I checked the live feed and spotted 3 figures creeping around the base of my solar tower with tools. They wore hoodies and gloves and tried to avoid the cameras, but my system was equipped with thermal imaging and automatic lighting. The instant they moved closer to the base supports, floodlights kicked on and a siren began blaring through hidden speakers. They scattered like roaches. I recognized one of them immediately from the security footage. Roger, Karen's cousin and self-appointed HOA security coordinator. The other 2 were likely board members. That was all I needed. I delivered the footage to the sheriff's office first thing in the morning. A deputy visited me later that day and confirmed charges could be pursued. Trespassing, attempted vandalism, and possibly endangerment if they had damaged the foundation. They assured me it was being taken seriously. I also forwarded the footage to the county's Clean Energy Protection Division. That's when the real pressure hit Karen. State energy law was crystal clear. Harassment, interference, or tampering with a legal renewable energy system carried steep penalties. Civil fines, potential criminal charges, and full revocation of HOA enforcement privileges. That very evening, I received an official notice from the county. Karen and the Silver Pines HOA had been placed under investigation for obstruction of state-approved energy systems. A hearing was scheduled. The consequences wouldn't just affect her. They'd threaten the HOA's entire structure. When news of the investigation broke, the neighborhood erupted. Some people were furious, others overjoyed. Karen's supporters retreated into silence, while former skeptics started whispering apologies to me over their hedges. The same people who once complained about shadows were now more concerned about being named in a lawsuit. Still, Karen wouldn't back down. She sent a final neighborhood letter, this one titled, "The Fight for Silver Pine's Soul." In it, she accused me of manipulating county officials, bribing the press, and running an illegal energy cartel. She claimed the solar tower's real purpose was to disrupt smart meters and influence voting patterns. At this point, even her last loyal followers had begun pulling back. The absurdity had reached critical mass. I received a bouquet of flowers from one neighbor with a note that read, "Sorry I signed the petition. Your tower is awesome. Also, Karen might be losing it." As the hearing date approached, I prepared everything meticulously. Malcolm assembled documents, timestamps, permits, and security footage. The county officials requested a site visit, during which I gave them a full tour of the solar tower. They were impressed, not just by the structure but by how much energy it produced. The system had already offset over 80% of my grid usage and had begun feeding excess electricity back into the grid. One official commented that my project should be used as a case study. Karen, in contrast, refused to let them onto her property. She claimed they were agents of the tower regime. The day of the hearing arrived, held at the local municipal building with a small audience allowed. Karen showed up in a power suit 3 sizes too tight, carrying boxes of folders and printouts. She ranted for nearly 20 minutes about architectural integrity, energy tyranny, and how my tower had psychologically destabilized the neighborhood. Her arguments collapsed the moment county officials played my security footage on the courtroom screen. The trespassing, the fake inspectors, the sabotage attempts, it was all there. The silence in the room was deafening. When it was my turn, I simply presented the facts. Permits, compliance, the energy output, the public interest, and the endless documentation of harassment. It was methodical, respectful, and devastatingly effective. The panel concluded in less than 30 minutes. Their ruling. The tower remained, the HOA was fined, and Karen was personally barred from any enforcement roles pending psychiatric evaluation and civil review. She stormed out of the building without a word. I don't think her heels even touched the floor. That evening, I climbed halfway up the tower to the small deck I had built to enjoy sunset. The air was cool. The panels were angled perfectly west, catching the last rays of the day. Down below, I saw families walking, kids riding bikes, a father. The weeks following the hearing felt like the first true breath of fresh air since this entire ordeal began. There were no more notices taped to my door, no more threats of legal action scribbled in bold red ink, no more trespassers creeping around at midnight pretending to be inspectors. The tower stood tall and untouched, basking in the morning light like a monument to reason and resilience. Karen's house sat directly in its shadow for 3 hours every afternoon, and while she once would have screamed about photosynthesis crimes, now she kept her curtains drawn and her windows closed. It was the quietest her side of the street had been since I moved in. Word around the neighborhood was that she'd taken a forced leave of absence from the HOA while they conducted a full audit of the board. Some whispered she was preparing to move. Others said she was still scheming from her living room with a corkboard full of yarn and conspiracy articles. I didn't care. For the first time in months, I had the peace she once tried so hard to destroy. I decided it was time to do something the HOA would never expect. I threw a party. But not just any party. A full-blown, neighborhood-wide, solar-powered celebration. I called it the Solar Barbecue Bash and invited every single household in Silver Pines. I made no mention of the HOA or Karen or the battle that had consumed us. The invite simply said, "Come enjoy the shade, soak in the sun, and see what renewable energy can really do." I had no idea how many people would show up. A part of me thought maybe only a handful would come, a few polite neighbors and the teens who helped build the foundation. But on the day of the event, lawn chairs started appearing early, followed by picnic blankets, coolers, even a bounce house someone brought without warning. I connected the solar system to power outdoor fans, speakers, food warmers, even an ice cream machine I had wired up just for fun. The tower didn't flicker once. Music played, kids ran around with glowing bracelets, and adults actually mingled. It felt like a real community again. Not one built on rules and restrictions but on shared space, curiosity, and maybe even a little awe. People asked questions about how the tower worked, how much power it generated, how they might start their own smaller setups. Some were skeptical at first, but once they realized their phones were charging off the solar ports faster than usual, their curiosity turned into enthusiasm. One older man who once supported Karen came over with a cup of iced tea and said, quietly, I thought this thing would be a disaster, but it's actually kind of beautiful. I thanked him and offered him a tour. He said maybe next time, but smiled the whole walk back to his seat. The moment that sealed the night came just after sunset. I had programmed a light display into the tower's solar array, nothing too flashy, just a simple message built out of synchronized LED patterns that pulsed across the structure's height. At exactly 8 p.m., the words lit up, "Welcome change." The crowd went still for a second, watching the letters shine against the night sky. Then someone started clapping. Then more joined. It wasn't thunderous, not like a concert or anything. But it was real. It was earned. And I knew in that moment that all the struggle had meant something more than just personal victory. The tower wasn't just mine anymore. It had become something larger, a symbol that even in the most HOA-strangled neighborhoods, change was possible when you stood your ground. I expected to feel triumphant that night, and I did. But I also felt something deeper, relief. The months of stress, of watching every movement on my property, of dealing with endless paper threats and verbal assaults, it all began to lift. The following morning, I slept in for the first time since installing the windmill. No angry emails. No harassment. Just a light breeze and a yard full of thank you notes taped to the gate. Some were handwritten. One was from a child who drew the tower like a giant superhero standing over the neighborhood with a cape made of solar panels. Eventually, the HOA had to elect a new president. Karen didn't run. Her resignation came quietly in the form of a short bulletin posted in the clubhouse window, stating she was stepping down due to health and personal reasons. The board elected a new head, Jenna, a former Marine turned community organizer, who immediately called for a re-evaluation of HOA bylaws, emphasizing transparency, fairness, and modernization. I met her one morning at the dog park, and she told me straight up, "I saw what you went through. It's not happening again, not under my watch." She also told me the county had issued a final ruling that any future green energy projects, once permitted, were untouchable by HOA interference. Apparently, my case had set a local precedent. In the months that followed, 4 new homes installed rooftop solar panels. 2 more added micro-wind turbines. The HOA newsletter, once Karen's personal propaganda machine, now included monthly tips for sustainable living. I was asked to write a column called Power in Progress. I kept it light, practical, and never once mentioned Karen by name. There was no need. Her shadow was gone, both metaphorically and literally. I still saw her once after all that. It was a Saturday morning at the farmer's market downtown. She wore large sunglasses and tried to duck behind a stand selling organic strawberries, but we locked eyes for a split second. She looked thinner, smaller somehow. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. She knew she had lost not just a fight, but a grip she had tried to maintain over everyone and everything. And in that silence, I felt no hatred, no anger. Only a quiet sense of justice. Sometimes karma doesn't come with handcuffs or headlines. Sometimes it just arrives as an unwanted shadow that stretches across your yard. Back at home, I continued to expand the tower's functions. I built a digital weather station into its base, added a community-powered library that ran on the tower's excess charge, and eventually connected a small EV charging station near the curb that anyone in the neighborhood could use. It was free. It always would be. I wanted people to see that innovation didn't have to be selfish, that when one person stands up against pointless control, it opens a door for others to walk through too. People started referring to my place as the Tower House, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with a grin. I didn't mind either way. Because the truth is, it wasn't about me anymore. It was about showing people that they didn't have to accept unfairness just because it came wrapped in policy. That you could fight back without being cruel. That you could win without stooping low. The tower was never meant to block Karen's house or ruin her garden. But in the end, it revealed who she really was and reminded everyone else who they could be. And so the sun kept rising, the tower kept humming, and Silver Pines slowly transformed, not because of HOA mandates or angry protests, but because one day one man built something the rules didn't like. And when the rules tried to tear it down, he stood taller. Not out of spite, but because sunlight should never be something you have to ask permission to catch.